Greetings and welcome once again to the Gaming Codex, the show right to explain to you all the various words and terms used to describe video games in the video games industry. Today's term is that of free-to-play. And according to a general definition, free-to-play or F2P or FTP, video games are games that give players access to a significant portion of their content without paying. There are several kinds of free-to-play games, but the most common is based on the freemium software model, thus free-to-play games are oftentimes not entirely free. This exactly is why we call them free-to-play games instead of free games. Free games are free, they require nothing from you, they will never ask you for money. Free-to-play games, on the other hand, are free in the sense that you can play them for free, but you can spend money on them. At a certain point you may be required to spend money on them either to continue playing or because you will not be able to be competitive in any way unless you fork up some cash. This is also a way to differentiate between what shareware was, because although shareware was free to play up until you get to one point where you're supposed to pay money for, shareware was more of an extended demo version, where you had a big chunk of the game up front for free, without monetization being built and all that much into it, apart from a form at the end asking you if you wanted to buy it. There are many ways in which games are able to actually sustain themselves by being free to play. And by that I mean they usually employ a cash shop that lets you buy different things. Some of them are cosmetic. Most games that do their best to not really let the players go wild with power just because they have money tend to only focus on giving them cosmetics or very small convenience items to help them along. For example, Path of Exile will let you buy extra inventory slots, well not inventory but extra stash slots, so you will be able to have more loot stashed around that's common between all your characters. In itself, that is not something wrong. That is not something that will give a player a distinct advantage over another one, especially in the way that it's implemented in Path of Exile, because by default you already have a lot of space in your stash, considerably more than you used to have in single-player games like Diablo 2 that required you to buy an expansion just to get more space in your stash, and still didn't have enough. Other games go in different directions. They will amp up the convenience to the point where gaining experience in a game that requires you to gain experience to progress becomes absolutely trivial with a cash shop, but it can be absolutely nerve-wracking without one. And then there are examples where you can outright buy resources that are very hard to collect and very hard to get without paying for them. The worst cases will outright let you buy power, which usually leads to pay to win, that being a subject we already covered in another episode of the Gaming Codex. Now, what is the popular definition of free-to-play? Well, that would be pay to win. There is, by default, the expectation that most modern free-to-play games will be pay to win. This is not an unfounded assumption, because a lot of free-to-play games, especially in the mobile sector, are specifically made to be maybe not super duper pay to win in the sense that you buy power, but you are required to pay. You are mentally conditioned to pay in order to progress. Levels are designed to seem like they can be beaten by simply playing, but it turns out that they actually aren't, and you are required to pay to progress after a certain point. And it's done in such a underhanded way that you don't necessarily think it's a paywall, but it does start grinding at you to the point where you will cave in and pay, or you'll quit and play something else. But again, not all games were made free to play just to be pay to win. Free to play came about because of two things. One was that there was a lot of piracy in certain areas of the world where people would not be all that willful to pay an upfront cost for a game or to pay a monthly subscription, which is why usually you would find MMOs in China, in South Korea, basically all of Asia and Eastern Europe, if you will, built around the concept of free-to-play. And yes, some of them would stray quite far into the pay-to-win model of selling direct power, selling privilege, selling advantages, selling a better game, basically, than what you would have access to if you were just playing for free. In that sense, you mostly became the product. If you didn't pay, you were there as filler for the people who would play. So the world would be filled with enough people so that those who would give money to the game developer, to the publisher, would have something to use that money on, to display their power upon, to lord over somebody, if you will. But on the other hand, there were some MMORPGs that did not start out with that idea in mind. Some of them were outright, proper, monthly subscription, pay upfront games that could not survive with that model because, well, there weren't enough players, there weren't enough people willing to spend money month by month on the game. And the biggest, the most high-profile game that went free-to-play in the western part of the world was Dungeons & Dragons Online. In the Eberron Unlimited update, it became free-to-play, and while it did have things like being able to buy a +2 sword, +2 gear, I think, which +2 is kind of a heck of a lot if you think of it in D&D terms. Not sure if it's still a heck of a lot in the game after it got some updates, but that allowed the game to flourish. It went from being nearly shut down because it wasn't profitable to raking up 1 million players within a month and being able to sustain itself enough so that it would continue to function for years and years and years. And it still functions, it's still up, it's still getting updates, it's still being maintained. People are still playing it in spite of it already having competition in D&D in the form of Neverwinter. The game, because it went free to play, managed to sustain itself. And it marked a moment in time where this was a proven fact. Going free to play was beneficial. It wasn't throwing in towel, it wasn't giving up. It was demonstrably profitable. So then the floodgates opened and every MMO publisher and developer that could still make their game free to play, unless it was Electronic Arts or NCSoft. No wait, let me rephrase that. Unless it was Electronic Arts and NCSoft, and they didn't hate the games they were trying to publish, made their MMOs for the most part free to play. There is still a couple that tried the pay to play model or the subscription model, but eventually all of them went free. Even World of Warcraft, the biggest one possible, has a free to play component. Even EVE Online has it. Free to play reinvigorated the MMO genre after the big behemoth, the gigantic gargantuan World of Warcraft, turned it all into itself. Now, what is the marketing definition of free-to-play? Well, that would be, there she blows, whale ho! The reality is that most players that are in a free-to-play game will never pay any money for it. And while that may seem like that's a bad thing at first, these games are built around the idea of whales, the idea that there will be people that will not only just spend money on the game once in a while, but they will go full hog. They will spend more money on the game than everybody else that ever thought about paying for the game would. We're talking hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of dollars. Sometimes made by children with their parents' credit cards without the knowledge of their parents. Sometimes made by cats that just ran around the keyboard for a while. Sometimes made through sheer theft of identity and credit card fraud. Regardless of the origin, the idea of the whale, the big spender, is crucial to free-to-play games. And of course that means that that person needs to have their needs catered to, they need to have something to spend money on, they need to be treated like they're big rollers, which is why a lot of games do still tend to go towards the selling power route, so that those people that do spend a lot of money can feel like they are really getting their money's worth. So closes another edition of the Gaming Codex. Come back next time when we will talk about a brand new subject. Goodbye.